because I needed to do something harder than the blindness. Just so the blindness wouldn't be the hardest thing in my life, I said, okay, if I have something harder, then that will kind of be less hard in my thinking. And yeah, I remember the first day I got there, I went, uh-oh, what did I do? And got to my hotel and set up the bike, and a couple days later I went out and got in traffic and just started pedaling.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello, I'm your host, Bella Malloy, and I'm very happy to introduce my guest for today's episode of the Seek Travel Ride podcast, Robert Reynolds. For over 40 years, Robert made his living as a painter. Recreating scenes and landscapes wasn't only his profession, but also at the very centre of his identity. So you can only imagine the upheaval and turmoil that ensued when Robert suffered from a rare stroke, which left him totally blind in his left eye and unable to paint. It's really hard for me to fathom how you would react to such a life-changing event. But Robert decided instead to pursue his curiosity and passion to explore this world, and has since spent the past 6 years cycle touring extensively. Robert, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Oh, I'm really excited to be speaking with you, Robert. I feel like the stories we're going to hear come out from you on these adventures are going to be really impactful ones.
I hope so.
So, I think my first question's not the hardest question, but can you remember the very first bicycle you ever rode?
I sure can. It was my older brother's piece of junk, which this was when I was 7. And I said, I can't do this. So I saved up. And I bought a Humber English bicycle. It cost me $42 in 1960.
Oh, what color was it?
Bronze. I adored it. It was my best friend. Back then, you could get away with traveling as a kid and not coming home all the time like kids have to now. They can't go out and play. But we were outdoors until, 9 o'clock every night.
That speaks to my soul a bit because a daughter of a very loving Greek mother, my early bike rides were limited to what we call in Australia the front nature strip, which is like the grass that's right outside the front of your house. And I used to always, every now and then, sneakily try and take off on the sidewalk or the pavement a bit just to make the pedaling a little bit easier for myself, but also just to go that little bit further. But just the idea that you would be adventuring, all hours of the day on this bike is great.
Oh, it's fabulous, yeah. I'm actually looking for that model so I can get one. I'm going on eBay and all that and researching it. Yeah, I want that bike. I brought home a Dutch bike a couple of years ago, the old-fashioned Dutch bikes.
Like a Gazelle?
Yeah, like an old Gazelle. And I have one in my backyard now, so that's kind of fun. So I figured time to get my old Humber.
I love those Dutch bikes. I have a soft spot equally for those. In Australia, I cycle commuted to my workplace on an old Dutch bike. I bought it from a lovely lady called Maureen, and so my Dutch bike was called Maureen the Townie, and Maureen and I had many, many adventures taking the long way to work and back home each day, so...
Now, does she have fenders?
Yeah, the whole thing. A step through, big upright, sit up and beg sort of handlebar position,
And the most stable bike you can ride.
Absolutely. Oh no, I love that. Internal gears and everything, and really comfortable. I could ride to work with my work clothes. But you know what? We're not here to learn about my story. We're here to learn about your story.
Okay.
I guess, Robert, before we get into the detail, could you just take a moment right up front just to introduce yourself to our listeners?
All right. I'm Robert. I've been a painter for 40 years, and I started out doing illustration. In fact, I did almost all of the Sonic the Hedgehog illustrations.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, I did book covers. And the crazy thing is, I gave the most important one to my nephew. And then I thought about it, and that was 20 plus years ago when it first came out. And I said, I wonder if it's worth anything. So I called up the Sonic Collectors Club, and they said, oh, yeah, that's worth like $25,000. And I went, my nephew just got happy. So, yeah, I illustrated medical books, album covers, a lot of classical album covers. And then I started painting my own stuff more and more. And I did landscapes and stuff like that to make a living for the first 5 years. And then I broke off and did pretty much abstract and altered realism that came from inside of me. I didn't, paint from outside, I painted from inside.
Painting's been part of your life, not just as a profession, but like from being a young child too. Like you've always been drawn to it, haven't you?
Right. My father was a photographer when I was a child, and my mother was a Sunday painter, which was an interesting combination. And I would help my dad when I was 3 or 4 in the darkroom. And I don't know if you've ever watched photos being developed. You put the paper in, and a image appears out of magic. And I remember looking at it as a child, completely amazed at the fact that the magic of that happening. From a blank sheet to a picture that I recognized the people in, the places. And it was a really interesting back and forth language. Then I would paint with my mother. We'd have a blank canvas and the color would go on. So I saw 2 different ways of making an image, black and white in the Photoshop, not Photoshop, but the photo studio, and then color painting with my mom. So that's been in my head for years. I mean, I think in black and white, and then I can think in color.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to have the dichotomy of that. I published a book of my drawings about 20 years ago. I have probably 5,000 drawings. And they're not sketches, they're actual full drawings, finished drawings. Yeah, it's still out there. You can find it on occasion with, Abe Books and, the online booksellers.
Yeah, wow.
It's called Listen.
And you were talking there about, you could think and see both in black and white and in colour. With your artwork, did you have a preference for colour or black and white? Like, did you alternate between the two as well?
Yeah, it's funny. I was doing a bicycle tour of the coast of California in about 1983. And I did such a dumb thing. We didn't have weather and forecasts and like we do now, and wind and all that stuff. So I started down as far south as you can go and went north, which is kind of dumb because the winds go from north to south. And I had a horrific headwind every minute I was on the bike. I remember being above San Francisco, right in the Point Reyes area. And I remember I was breathing so hard, it was so difficult. I was breathing so hard, I turned my head to the side. You know how when it's so hard you have to turn your head to take a breath? And I turned my head, and there was a barn about 100 meters off the main road, and the door was open. And right in the opening was an etching press, a big etching press. And I did a lot of printmaking. And of course, I went right in, sat and looked at it. And the owner came by and we were talking. And he had built it for his wife. He was an aeronautical engineer. And I said, I want one. So he built me one. And it was 32 by 54 inches, weighed 1 ton.
Wow.
And yeah, it was funny. I waited, I don't know, for 6 months to get it. And the funny thing is it cost $800 to ship a 1 ton printing press across the United States. And the last 50 feet cost me $800 because I had to get a forklift and a bunch of guys and all that. So I've always been that's part of the press, is the story of the $800 cross country and the $800 for 50 feet. Yeah, so I've done printmaking my whole life. Still love it, but can't really do it.
Yeah. And so has your prime profession, looking back, like we said, so many decades, and a very successful painter as well, from what I've gathered as well, Robert. Was that your profession from day one? Like, or is it something you built up to become full-time at? Or
I was actually a carpenter when I was very young. I worked until I was 24, and then I had a head-on guy. This is a great story. I was flying hang gliders for a long time, and I crashed my hang glider. We all crashed on occasion, but crashed my hang glider, broke my ankle and a couple dents and bruises. Went to the hospital. They fixed me up, and I couldn't drive because I had a big cast on. Called my buddy. He came and picked me up. We were driving home from the hospital, and a drunk driver cut across the lane and hit his head on. I went back to the same hospital, all banged up again. And that was kind of a banner day.
Far out.
Yeah.
Would take a bit of recovery from too.
It wasn't that bad. I broke my ankle and some ribs and a couple other things.
Oh, nothing major. Just you broke your ankle and your ribs and a couple of other things. Oh,
well,
come on, tough man. I'm sure it hurt.
It hurt. It hurt quite a bit. But still, it was so much like, who gets that? I mean, how many people does that happen to?
No, it's like the
Yeah,
consequence of the sliding doors moment of the butterfly effect. This will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen.
right.
Like what are the chances? So this happened in your mid-20s.
Yeah, and I stopped working at that point and actually took 2 years and traveled all over. I lived in Hawaii for 8 or 9 months or 10 months. I was just all over the country, California, and having fun.
And so travel and seeing the world has really been something like your artwork then, Robert. It's been something that's been a part of you and a part of your identity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious then, just from my understanding, I wonder whether it is just that creative, part of your identity that had that yearning to travel far and wide from a young age, to experience and to see different things.
That's a good point. You know where that started from? It's a really fascinating story. As I said before, we had an awful lot of freedom growing up. We grew up in an area that was all farms and marshes because we were right on the ocean. So it was either marshes and wetlands or forest and farms. And my brother and I, he was very adventurous also. When we were 6 and 7, we used to walk a mile through the woods to an estuary that was in the beautiful marshes. And we had been read Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer growing up, and so that kind of adventure was in our heads. We used to go iceberging, where we would jump on a chunk of ice in the estuary and float out under a bridge, a small bridge, and then out into the main river. And we were like 6 and 7, 7 and 8, and we'd be floating down the river with our poles, and we'd be looking, the river was maybe 150, 200 feet wide. It was a good sized river. And we'd be having the time of our life sitting in the middle of this iceberg, and we'd we'd look at the bank and we'd be seeing people pulling their hair out, screaming and yelling, and we thought they were cheering us on. So sure enough, the fire engines would come, they'd get the boat and they'd come out and get us, and they'd, don't do it again, don't do it again. And we did it twice, and then we learned you don't do that. But what a blast.
Robert, I mean, I'm here, confined to riding my bike on the grass in front of the house on the nature strip, and you're out there, casting icebergs out to the river and setting sail with your own makeshift boats. I mean,
Yeah.
actually, the funny thing there, when you were telling me the story about living near the marsh and the estuary, you can tell I'm Australian because it didn't even occur to me that you would be in a place where that area would be potentially iced over.
Oh, a lot of ice.
Certainly no crocodiles there.
Yeah. And the thing I remember the most in a way was that we had to balance the iceberg, because if we sat too much off center, it would start tilting. And that was a little bit scary. Then it would go back and it would always kind of be tilting in the water. When I look back, it was pretty dangerous.
And so you also undertook a few cycle tours very early on as well, didn't you? Like cycle touring isn't something you've only just recently discovered. It's actually been something that perhaps you rediscovered, I'm not sure, and we'll find out. But you did undertake tours at a younger time in your life too, didn't you?
Yeah, the 70s I did. I didn't do the cross country 1976, but I traveled on bike 78, 79, like from New Haven to Montreal, stuff like that. Fun 2 weekers.
Were you traveling solo or with others?
Yeah, quite honestly, I like traveling solo. I've been with a few people and I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm cold.
See you later.
Yeah, see you later. Yeah, I'm not good with that.
Yeah, and I guess conversely, there's times where you're the one who's tired and hungry and cold, and you don't want to. Yeah,
Right.
it's not always that other perspective, is it?
No.
On the cycle tours that you undertook back then in the 70s, was it purely about a point to point? Did you have like markers in mind, or like was it your final destination? Like, what was the motivations?
Hypothetical routes.
Okay.
And I would, make a very loose destination, and I would go somewhere, and I would just constantly wander off the path. That's where my sense of discovery really gets awakened, when I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be concentrating on. Like, how many miles do I have to go? What do I have to do? And you forget about peripheral vision when you're looking at that computer all day, and you're worried about getting to this destination or whatever. So yeah, I always meandered.
Yeah, and always in the moment then. I mean, what you're saying there resonates with me. one of the best things I've done for my riding lately is just actually had my cycling computer. It's on battery saver mode, which means that the screen's totally off unless I touch it, which means I don't need to be fixated on a number of a speed or a kilometres or whatever done. I'm really just in the moment looking at the landscape.
Right.
I wish I had the skill like you do, Robert, to be a painter. I'm certainly not a painter, but the creative side of me is definitely a passionate photographer. And I definitely see my bike as a way of getting me to these amazing places to view things that I wouldn't necessarily see otherwise.
Best transportation.
Definitely. So, did you paint during these tours at all?
No, it's funny. I didn't have the amount of equipment. It was too bulky. So I've been carrying, I should show it to you. I've been carrying a drawing box and a drawing book with me for 40 years. In fact, do you have a second I can go grab it to show you? Or
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to see it.
All right. I bought this in 1972 for a quarter, and this is the stuff I've had since then. These are all my original tools. The pencils, they come and go, but that's I've had since 79. Yeah, so I carried this and a drawing book.
For the benefit of our listeners, like the box here, it's like a metallic box. It's a bit green, and it's probably the size of maybe
a book.
A book, yeah, exactly. And it's got all the tools of the trade for you.
Absolutely. And there's the size book I used. That's it. Exactly. I've got over 60 or 70 full.
Wow. And so do you have those then, like, again, going back to your tours, you took that with you on your tours?
Yeah, when I was traveling in Europe, always had it. I drew every time I stopped moving. I'd open the book and start drawing.
Oh, wow. I'd love to. I might be fortunate enough to be in a position where I could ask to see some photos of that at some stage, because and it's been something that I've really appreciated and feel so thankful for, that in this position as a host, interviewing interesting people like yourself as guests for the show, I get an insight into how people undertake these type of tours. And I really love how so many of my guests have been dedicated enough to, say, keep a daily journal or something and write down, what it was that they experienced in the day, whether it was, one sentence or a paragraph or pages, depending on what had happened. So for me, Robert, I'm imagining that sketchbook was your equivalent of a written journal for your tours. Would I be correct in saying that?
Language is my second language. So that was my first language. So that's the most efficient way for me to get out, was really inside of me, not what I saw, but how I took in what I saw, made it my own vision, and then put it on the book. So it was a really interesting conduit of reality to imagination, to mixing those two and have it come out in the paper. And I never got tired of the magic. Again, going back to the photography, developing photographs and watching the images appear on black and white paper, that's what I do with a pencil. So it's the same process.
Did you over time revisit what you had sketched during your tours, and did they inspire you for any of your subsequent paintings you'd create?
No, I didn't really turn them into paintings. They were complete in themselves. Those were what I was going for, boom, and I kept them that way. Wait, I take that back.
Okay.
I was living in Holland in the early 90s, and I was writing quite a bit, and I did do paintings from those drawings. Yeah, I did quite a few actually. So not from the 70s or 80s, but from the 90s up until.
Actually, Robert, I'm just thinking now, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010s. Does that mean you've been touring for, 40, 50 years? That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm aspiring to be like Robert. Can I ask, and this will be a tricky question.
Sure.
Is there a favourite tour that you took?
Ooh, I would say the times I went to Montreal 3 or 4 times, and Ottawa, went up to Ottawa a couple of times. I had friends up there. I would say those were just like an introduction into what I wanted it to be. I knew kind of like going to California and doing the coast and all, that was one thing, but camping out in the forests in New England and major hills, major mountains, all that stuff. It's hard to put into words. It really is. I can't put my finger on one specific thing, except the people I met were fun. But no, I can't put one special thing on it.
I guess as a collective, it was all things that sort of warmed your soul, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I got fed every day, and every night you reflect on the day, and it's just beautiful.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk a little bit there about your parents, Robert, because obviously, like you said, your mother was a Sunday painter.
Uh-huh.
So I guess the thought of visually expressing things that you were thinking about, you got that idea that you could do that organically from experiencing and watching your mother. Your father was a photographer. He also was a private in World War II, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. He was a sniper, and he had some just unbelievable stories about New Guinea, Philippines, Leyte. He, poor guy, he said he was in the first boat, the first wave on 3 landings, and he survived. And he had some pretty amazing stories. And he had PTSD quite badly. It did affect his life, unfortunately, and he did the best he could because no one knew about it back then. And I remember, God, we were at a parade and firecrackers went off or something, and he went down to he jumped on the ground like there was Japanese attacking. It was pretty, as a child, it was pretty interesting to see.
I can't picture the horrors of that war. As an Australian, learning about the war in the Pacific during the Second World War is something that we are educated about.
Right.
And the horrific sort of scenes that took out on the battlefields across the Pacific there as well, which your father was a part of. You mentioned he was a photographer, and you came across photos from the war. Were they photos that he had taken, or were they photos that he...
Yeah, photos he had taken, and his friend had taken his camera, or my dad's camera, and taken pictures of my dad in certain things. He only ended up with maybe 25 photos because when he got wounded, they stole his camera, they stole everything. So we would have had a couple of 100 shots. So unfortunate.
But you came across these photos at some stage, didn't you? And that led to an inspiration to go and see these sites?
Well, he always, he told his stories as kids. He redacted them pretty heavily when it came to the bad parts. We didn't hear about that until later. He left 150 pages worth of memories. And I read them and decided to go retrace his steps. And damn if he wasn't accurate. He had such a perfect memory. He remembered how to say hello in some of the local dialects. It's wild. So I spent a couple months in New Guinea and the Philippines, and I am astounded what those young kids had to do, what they went through, like the Aussies with the Kokoda Trail. And my dad actually talked a lot about his Australian friends. And yeah, he made a lot of buddies there.
Yeah, and so you took these trips. Were they weren't necessarily part of cycling trips at all?
No.
To discover with your dad's photos, but you then recreated his images in artwork, didn't you?
Yeah, I did a whole exhibit. I did a lot of dry points, a lot of oil paints, and paintings were pretty good size. Some of them were 7x7. Stuff like that, and they were very abstract. In fact, I used a lot of the battle maps as a basis to show the confusion, the direction, the intent, all the things that a young soldier or a young man might experience in that kind of situation. I tried to use the maps as a basis. I did not depict any of the actual gunfire or fighting. I kept it more of like what was he experiencing as far as his abstract thought process. Like thinking of home mixed with where he was, mixed with what happened to him and his friends. So I tried to get a whole lot of the ingredients of that era of his life onto paint.
It would have been just extremely impactful. The connection there, particularly in those spots, going to those very spots that your father had stood, had taken photos of during the theatre of war.
Yeah.
I could only imagine recreating that scene so impactful. As you say, language is your second language because your first language for yourself is, your art and your painting.
Right.
And that's how you're depicting those scenes. So I wonder, Robert, were they some of your first travels to Southeast Asia and in those areas in the Pacific as well? Or had you done travels prior?
Well, I'd been to Japan, Thailand a few times, just as a tourist. But yeah, that was the first time I had serious intent.
I can only imagine the impact that would have had on you. I feel that profoundly.
And what's really interesting? He had told us stories about how Life magazine, remember that magazine? Yeah. He said, I was in Life magazine. We used to go, oh yeah, sure, Dad. Oh yeah, right, Dad. And he also told us that he was, I don't know, you must remember us. And I was like, when MacArthur came ashore in Leyte, I will return. My dad was his guard. They took his squad, which was all sharpshooters, out of the jungles brought him to the beach, and all of a sudden MacArthur walks ashore. And my dad told me where he was in relation to them. And there's a sculpture now of MacArthur coming ashore on the spot where that photo was taken. And I actually stood right where my dad would have stood. And that was a very interesting kind of jump back in history. It was like stuck in between time, because I'm standing there looking at the sculpture, and I'm imagining what the heck my 20-year-old dad felt at the same spot watching MacArthur come ashore and being one of his guards. Amazing, just amazing.
You know, there's part of me, Robert, when you tell that story, just reflecting on what we've been discussing just in these last few minutes, that wonders, you relived a moment that was taken in a picture or you know, you've seen in archives and stuff from the war, from your father. I wonder if you were to flick back through those early sketchbooks of your bike tours. And I realise that your sketches are an interpretation of what you felt during the tour, but I wonder if there's any places then, if you were to go back there now and to see those places, whether it would have a similar impact.
In Philippines and New Guinea?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question. I really can't answer that. I don't know. It's almost like two separate realities in a way.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
I don't even know how to word it. I did get to within 100 yards circumference of where he was shot, which was really fascinating, because he talked a lot about that, and it was very intense. What he went through, and then me going there, and I had to climb this stupid mountain with snakes all over. I mean, it was horrendous. And you're thinking, what was a 20-year-old fully armed with all that stuff? How would he climb a hill that steep in the mud and then get shot on top of it? So yeah, that was interesting. He was wounded rescuing an officer, and it was just like Saving Private Ryan. You know, when they wounded a guy and then someone would go to rescue him, they'd shoot that guy. That's the same exact scenario my dad got into.
Far out.
And then I did find the church that he talked about, and I checked out Life magazine, November of 44, and sure enough, there's a church, and there's the guy in the bunk next to it. It was like, wow, he really did have an incredible life. So yeah, that was fun.
I imagine a lot of that really it obviously had a profound impact on your life too, and led you to being how you are now, from those very early memories of 3-year-old helping to process, watching photographs being processed in, you know, the home darkroom. Yeah, and nurturing also your creativity and that creative side of you, nurturing that, you know, express yourself in the form of paint as well. As I said in the introduction, Robert, like, and it's so clear speaking with you now, like, your artwork and your painting really is part of you. It's your identity. But sadly, that part of your life got really shaken up to its core a few years ago.
Oh yeah.
Can you explain to our listeners what exactly occurred and what's happened?
All right, very interesting. I was going to shoot a friend and her daughter, an old high school friend. I got up in the morning and I noticed that there was it was kind of like a rent or a gash in the universe. I got up and I remember thinking, I was sweating, drenched in sweat. I didn't know what was wrong. And there was a hole about that big missing from sight. It was just, there was no black, it was nothing. It was just like nothingness. And I said, oh, that's weird. I wonder, I kept rubbing my eye. I thought it was something in my eye. And I got to the studio and I was shooting my friends. And I said, shit, I think I broke my camera. And because I couldn't see through it. So I went to the other eye and I said, oh, it works. It got worse at that moment. And I just got drenched in sweat. And my friend's daughter, who I was photographing, was the last person I saw normally, which was kind of sad. And it's funny because she asked me, she and I are friends, her whole family are friends, and she asked me if I would shoot her again on the 5-year anniversary, which was kind of interesting, and I did. And so she was the last person I saw clearly, and the first person I photographed with altered eyesight.
I can't ever imagine what that experience would have been like on that day, like, drenched in a fever sweat. And
it was very odd. It was really disconcerting. And I went to the doctor right after that, and they rushed me to the hospital, and it got progressively worse.
And did it take long to figure out what had happened and to get a diagnosis?
No. Luckily, a friend of mine is very connected with Yale, and I got the heads of all the departments as my private doctors. And I had the best care you can imagine. They tested everything double. And they finally said, Robert, you have a rare stroke. And I said, well, is it going to ever get better? And they said, no, it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. that was a really big kick. I mean, seriously, like, whoa. And after that, I decided, well, I'm going to keep trying to work. So every day I would go to my studio and stand in front of my easel with a blank canvas, and within an hour, I'd just sit there and cry every day for a year because I didn't want to let go of it. And I worked as hard as I could. I kept on trying to shift because this was my dominant eye. And I kept on trying to shift my dominance to that eye. And the doctor finally said, Robert, stop trying. You're too old. It's not going to shift over. And that's when I said, okay, done with that project, done with that life. Because what happens is the parallax, when I was painting, it would be straight there. But now I'm on a parallax and nothing lined up. I never knew how far away the canvas was, brush. And yeah, it was tough, very tough, very dark.
Could only imagine, because painting wasn't just a hobby for you. It's you. It's your identity.
And I had a big gallery for 7 years. I had a huge studio. I mean, it was. In fact, the one thing that I am so happy I got to do is my last real painting, large painting, was 9 by 11 feet for the Stony. What is it? What was that school where all the children were murdered?
Oh, Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook. They asked me to do a painting for the lobby, and that was an immense honor, and was also the last big painting I did. So I feel good about that. That was for me. It was a great way to go out. Not go out.
No, you're still very much here. But I understand what you mean. It's like you didn't realise it at the time. It was the last big commissioned work where you're almost signing off as an artist.
Yeah, and I donated it. I wouldn't take money for it. For me, it was a gift. Because I had this incredible gift, and I said, well, it's time for me to give that gift away. And I'm so glad I got to do that as my last major work.
The image that you did, I think I've seen it in a few articles and some small photos. It's a beautiful image for our listeners, depicting a scene of a flock of birds sort of rising up, isn't it?
It's a community of birds, and they're all different. I did not want to allude to children whatsoever. I didn't want to make it believe it was 26 children or 26 birds. Totally stayed away from that. The birds are all different species, all different colors, and they're all flying up in the same direction together. And they were like a flock. They all knew where each other were on the ascent. And yeah, it was just one of my favorite images that I got to do. I'm a happy camper on that one.
I'm proud for you, just hearing that story. The problems with your vision aside, you've also had your fair share of injuries as well, and having to recover from operations, haven't you?
Quite a bit. Smashed my right hip on a mountain bike, actually. I fell off the cliff. That was not fun. And after I had my hip replacement, I was just getting better, and they had me on a lot of narcotics, OxyContin of all things. And my best friend asked me if I wanted to have lunch with President Bush. And of course, being high as a kite on OxyContin, I said, sure. I had no idea how high I was. So the next day we got to New York City, and I got past the Secret Service, which I can't figure out because my eyes are rolling in my head. And, sat down. I was 5 feet from President Bush, and we had a nice time. We were talking, all this and that. And after lunch, he gave a small speech. And he was only 6-7 feet away, and he gave this nice little talk. And it was funny because I'm a Democrat, and they're Republicans. And he said, "Any questions?" And of course, I wasn't even thinking. I went, just like in 5th grade, I put my hand up and he goes, "Yes, Robert." And I said, "How would you like to see American society in 20 years?" And he was very nice about it. He goes, "Well, that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that." And I said, "Well, it's your job." And he went, "Yeah, you're right." And he actually gave a very nice response. He thought about it, and he gave a really interesting view of what he would like in 20 years, which is at this moment now, or almost. And after it was all done, everyone was shaking hands and this and that. And I noticed on the podium he had left his pen. So I said, "Oh, too easy a target." And I very gently walked over and put my arm on the podium and gently kind of slid the pen up into my sleeve. And I have it in my collection of odd stuff.
Oh, brilliant. You're a thief, but I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I had experiences I never would have guessed in my life that I would have. Like, we went to Las Vegas on a business trip for him, and we were coming down the elevator, and it opens up. We get in, and there's these guys, and I recognized Bill Gates. He was there. And the other guy next to me turned out to be Warren Buffett. And we all had dinner together. And I'm sitting talking. I didn't know who Warren Buffett was. That's how far out of the loop I am. So he's sitting right next to me. We're talking, and he asked me what I did, and I said, I'm a painter, and this and that. We had a really interesting discussion about it. And I said, what do you do? And he goes, he looked at me like, you don't know who I am, that kind of thing. And I was totally innocent. And he goes, well, I dabble in real estate. I didn't know he was the richest man in the world at the time.
Oh, far out.
And I had those things happen all the time.
You needed him to commission you for artwork then.
I know he didn't.
Hello everyone, it's Bella here from the show. I just wanted to quickly ask you all a real big favour. If you really enjoy listening to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, could I ask you right now to go into your podcast playing app and take the time to leave us a rating and review? The reason it's important is this is the way our show gets pushed out to a wider audience and discovered. So I'd really appreciate it if you could do that. Or alternatively, how about you just talk about the podcast with your friends and family, share it on your social media. Thanks so much. Now back to the show. So Robert, you persisted for, you said, about a year after this rare stroke took the vision and changed your world, changed your reality. You persisted for a year and then you just gave up.
Absolutely.
Well, not gave up, but
Well, I gave up painting. No, I gave up painting. I didn't give up life. I just sold everything. One day I said, okay, I'm done, and closed up the gallery, closed up my shop, got rid of everything, sold everything, and started traveling right off the bat.
Are there complexities then as we're getting into your cycle trips now and your bicycle tours? Because obviously touring has been something that's been in your life for decades, as we were discussing. What changes when you lose the sight fully from your dominant eye, and what changes?
Confidence. Right off the bat. Matter of fact, I was looking about that, and what are my fears on touring? Is traffic, dogs, and water. Right there. That's it. Too much traffic, too much dogs, not enough water.
I think I could probably add those to my own list. Dogs, definitely. Oh,
I hate them.
I love dogs. It's just dogs chasing me when I'm on my bike is not a pleasant. And many bicycle tours, many bicycle tours will recount stories of, being chased by stray dogs, or, maybe not even stray dogs. The farm dogs here in the Pyrenees in France that stray out of the farm borders are particularly vicious as well. I'll give you the bit. But you mentioned the traffic scares you as well. But it hasn't stopped you in going to these places where chaos reigns in a way. In fact,
no.
It was Hanoi, wasn't it, where you sort of were drawn to early on when you restarted this?
Ho Chi Minh,
okay.
And it was interesting. I said, okay, that's because I needed to do something harder than the blindness. Just so the blindness wouldn't be the hardest thing in my life. I said, okay, if I have something harder, then that will kind of be less hard in my thinking. And yeah, I remember the first day I got there, I went, uh-oh, what did I do? And got to my hotel and set up the bike. And a couple of days later, I went out, got in traffic, and just started pedaling. And I got into the rhythm that they use. And again, it's like the flocks that I painted. So I understood flocking in schools of fish. They don't ride like we ride in America. Over there, everyone kind of knows, they know how to weave. And actually, I picked it up pretty quick. The only trouble was having a 100-pound load, which made going from 0 to 15 miles an hour tough. You have to get that much mass getting up to speed.
So was that your very first tour to Ho Chi Minh and to Vietnam?
Yeah. After losing my sight, yes, it was.
Wow. And how long were you away for on that trip?
That one was 4 or 5 months. And it's funny, I was doing my notes and stuff. I have no idea where I was when I was there. Instead of a linear drawing, it's like a kid had scribbled my timeline.
But it's filled with memories nonetheless.
Oh my gosh, nonstop.
Was there a sense of rediscovering, or you had this disconnect from losing your sight, but all of a sudden, as you just said it, you had to do something that was harder than being blind?
Right. It worked.
Was it nourishing for you doing that?
Oh, right off the bat, because I in my mind, I conquered a very big fear of, getting in traffic with a bicycle that was fully loaded. And I didn't practice anything. I just got in there. And yeah, it was an unbelievable medicine. It worked. And I still don't like riding in America.
There's many times where I reflect back on riding in Australia where it has been anything but pleasant. It's more to do with that other fear factor that you listed in your list of three. It was definitely the car factor there. Australia is a beautiful country with beautiful scenery and beautiful places to ride a bike. It's just the car culture there sometimes isn't quite as compatible with that, unfortunately.
Right.
So this decision then, I'm going to do something that's harder than my blindness. It's not something that you've just done one off. This has really become a lifestyle choice for you now, hasn't it?
Yeah, I feel more at home in a tent or on the bike than I do at home. I bought my house 30 years ago. And, I know my little neighborhood in and out. I know the ocean right here in and out. And, I feel more at home now discovering. We all have limited time. I'm almost 70. So, how much time do we have? And I like filling it up.
I guess for yourself too, Robert, like you're filling it up, but you're visually seeing and experiencing what you can.
Absolutely. So, that's the way I get on the bike. And I was thinking about what it's like being on the bike now. And for me, the day is a slow progression of modules of sense. Like light comes by at the same speed I'm going forward. The light changes as I go by it. The sounds change, the smells change. So there's this ever non-ending change of all my senses. And I'm very aware of that when I'm riding. And it's quite beautiful. It's kind of like slow motion music in a way.
Oh, that 100% resonates with me. Every single bike ride or every single cycle tour I've taken, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's a sensory perception. Like all of your senses are heightened on a bicycle trip. Like yes, you're seeing things.
Absolutely.
You're feeling the wind on your skin or the sun or the rain on your skin. So you've got that sense of touch that's heightened. You're hearing the sounds of, it could be traffic, it could be dogs chasing you, hope not. The sound of a river in flood, or the wind rustling through the trees, or children laughing, birds.
The dappled light.
Exactly, and the smells as well. So you can smell the scenery around you too, whether it's food from a village or a restaurant or a vendor, or it's the smell of the sweet spring grass. Like to me,
exactly,
it's medicine for the soul, and I think it is because it's a true act of mindfulness. You're just in the moment experiencing things,
exactly,
but at a slow pace.
Very much so, yeah. And I love the way they come in little different waves. One will be dominant, like the smell. Then the next minute, the light will change, and your attention is always kind of being pulled in all these beautiful directions. And your appreciation. And that makes me love just the act of moving through the air.
I can totally put myself there right now on my bike, picturing those. So, Robert, how do you set where you want to go on tours? You've gone on, you're touring for 6 to 8 months a year now for the last few years. How do you decide on your destinations?
Well, I've always been drawn to Asia, especially Vietnam, because, I was in the last draft during that war. And a lot of my friends were there, my cousins were there, a couple of cousins died. And so it's been a big part of me in a way, and my generation's history. So I've always been interested in it. And then I started looking how beautiful it is. And I said, okay, that's it. And halfway through the first trip, I said, okay, I've got to do this 2 or 3 more times. There's so much to see there. And I tend to travel kind of like this. I don't have a linear itinerary. I just kind of go somewhere. And if I hear of a beautiful place or an exciting place or whatever, I'll definitely spend weeks just going back and forth, discovering those little gems that most tourists miss.
And meandering your way with no set plans, but just to experience.
Well, I have a general, it's like a finger drawing. Okay, there, and then whatever happens in between. I make my day every day. I say, okay, let's go here, let's go there, see what happens.
On that see what happens, I'm sure you've had many interesting things happen. And I was wondering whether you'd like to share some of those interesting encounters.
Oh, gosh. One really interesting one. I love the Mekong Delta. I love all deltas. I like Camargue, all of them. And so I decided to go off my path, and I was along the Mekong, and I see this island out there. And I said, got to go there. It's an island. So I found a guy with a canoe, rented him a canoe to take me to the island. And it was probably half a kilometer wide by maybe a kilometer and a half long. I got out there and I camped out in the woods, and then I started exploring it the next day. And there was probably a 6 or 7 foot wide path and almost nothing on it except bamboo huts and what you expect, except for this one house I went by that was kind of fancy. And I'm going, well, that's interesting, middle of nowhere in an island. And I decided to ask them where I could get another canoe to the other side. And I ended up spending 3 or 4 hours with them. And I noticed they had a brand new top of the line BMW in the garage. Yeah.
Sort of a bit out of place.
You think? It was great.
It's just a bit.
It was really crazy. Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, what business are they actually in? Because they said they were retired teachers. And I said, oh, okay. I wonder what they taught. But that was really unexpected to see probably a $75,000 BMW on an island with nowhere to go. I don't know how they got it there. And I don't know why they kept it there.
Yeah, of course.
So that was
like the roads.
Yeah, that was kind of fun. And they sent me. We had a great time, and they ended up giving me like 6 coconuts, and so I was loaded down with the coconuts and all that stuff. And yeah, that was one of them. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, it would have been. But your tours haven't just taken you into, Southeast Asia there. I mean, we've spoken, and over the decades you've gone all around the world, but you've also gone through South America as well and spent some time there in Colombia.
Yeah, last winter I spent 4 months in Colombia, then a month exploring the Amazon. And unfortunately, I couldn't tour that well in Colombia. It was too dangerous. Before I went, I talked to a few people who had been there the year before, 2 years before, and they said, oh, it's pretty safe. Well, I right before I left, I got in touch with a photographer from Colombia who worked with National Geographic, and he says, do not come here on a bicycle. I said, well, the other people said it was okay. He goes, no, it's an election year, and all the people are, who don't want this government are trying to overthrow it and this and that. And then all the Venezuelans were in. There was a huge exodus from Venezuela. They had no money, so they were all doing petty crime. And I could not walk down the street with my camera. I mean, police would stop, get out of their car and say, get home, get out of here with that camera. They will kill you for the camera. And I had to deal with that all the time. It was quite dangerous.
Different danger to the dogs.
Yeah, it was a clear and present danger, and it was everywhere. In fact, I ended up renting an apartment in Bogota for a month, and I was sitting there talking with the manager, and 100 feet away, a girl was getting robbed with 2 guys with pistols at her head, and we couldn't do anything. And that was in the nicest part of Bogota. And the police came, of course, and they caught him and all that, but still, I mean, nicest neighborhood, and that stuff happened. So when I went to the bad neighborhoods to photograph, I'd have to rent an Uber. And the first time I rented an Uber to do this, drive around the city to photograph, I rolled down the window and I started taking pictures. He stopped the car and he says, what are you, crazy? They'll kill you. So I had to he made me sit in the back and open up one of the windows and photograph through the window. That's the only way he would drive me around. It was very, that period of time was very tough. And I heard it's a lot better now. I love the country. The country's beautiful. The people I met were beautiful.
What year was that?
Oh, this was last winter. So I spent 5 or 6 months there. 5 months there, and then I went directly to Europe. That was I came back in September of last year, and then I had this operation stuff, and here I am. But I loved Colombia. Loved it. I mean, the scenery.
Do you feel, Robert, that that's a point in time, those dangers at the moment, due to the election cycle? Like, is it somewhere that you would return to?
Yeah, absolutely. It was. They said it was just because of the election and all the rebels. I forgot the name of all the rebels. They were creating trouble. I could not go to. My friends would not let me go to certain places, and it turned out that it was most of the country. And unfortunately, that I went at the wrong time. But I would love to go back. I found it spectacular. The people were absolutely friendly no matter where. Beautiful country. So I'll go back.
It's definitely been a constant theme with many of my other guests who've travelled in lots of different countries, is just the kindness of strangers that you come across when you're touring on a bike. I'm sure you've got many stories to recount of that as well.
In Colombia, all the time. Yeah, people warned me, don't go here, don't go there. And I ended up renting a Jeep for 3 or 4 weeks. That was a lot of fun. But a lot of nice people, and of course, they all blend together now. But yeah,
I imagine, Robert, like with the benefit of the extensive touring that you've done, you've been privy to having insights into so many different countries and cultures as well.
yeah. It's funny. For some reason, I fell in love with Netherlands. I think because I spent so much time there. And I've done 8 or 9 1-month tours in a row. Except I did miss COVID, that one bad year of COVID. But yeah, I go every year for a month or so. And it's one of my favorite countries because it's so easy to travel. And during the day, you'll have 5 or 6 amazing things to see and do. It's just a really interesting little country.
Cycling culture there as well.
Yeah.
And the frites too. They're pretty good too.
Oh, and oliebollen. You know oliebollen?
Oh, I do. I do. Some of my dearest friends are Dutch. They're from Friesland originally, although they live in Australia now.
Yeah, it's a beautiful country.
Yeah, I know you've toured through France, and obviously, I'm biased because, as an Australian, I'm choosing to live in France. I'm in the French Pyrenees. I'd love to hear some stories about your tours here.
Well, I love Brittany. Tough riding. It's constant little hills, enough to make you crazy.
They roll over into Normandy as well.
I know, but I spent a lot of time there, pretty much every area in Brittany. Where else? I love Bordeaux. Spent a lot. I spent 3-month tours in Bourgogne. That was great. Love it there. In fact, they have the best river weed anywhere because I love photographing the weed in rivers that, it's like this and it flows. And for some reason, they're just full of it. So I photograph a lot of that when I'm there. And the food is spectacular.
I know exactly what you're talking about. In fact, it was one of my first cycling trip to France is 10 years ago now. But I remember distinctly when we were in the Dordogne region near Salah, and the Dordogne River there has that beautiful, it's almost like moss, it's riverweed, but I've not seen it in that way.
Oh, I love it.
The food's not bad either.
No, it's okay. The baguettes, best in the world. I mean, when I got home during COVID, I started baking baguettes. And I must have made 1,000 of them. I mean, you come home, you have nothing to do, and you spend a whole day cooking baguettes. And yeah, beautiful.
Love it. But speaking of food, and we'll leave France behind for a little while. What cuisine do you most enjoy? You've traveled to so many different destinations. What cuisine like?
Oh gosh, France and Vietnam. Philippines. I like the Filipino food. God, there's so much of it. And I'm vegetarian, so that kind of narrows it down. I don't eat a lot of stuff there. Yeah, I don't know how to. I can't really narrow it down except for those 2 countries stick out more than others. I like food everywhere because when you're on a bike, you're eating. You'll eat anything.
You will. You need to as well on these tours. Like you were saying, with a load that you've got, probably, 50 kilos on the bike, if you're 100 pounds. I'm sorry, I'm doing the conversion here. But, close to 50 kilos on a bike, it takes a bit to... it takes a lot of energy to get from A to B, especially if you're taking the long way there, meandering along, right?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. What's your experience been on the road, Robert, when you've encountered other cycle tourists?
It's funny. I thought about this morning as I was getting ready, and I've only run into maybe a dozen. I have not run into another cycle tourer in Vietnam at all, period. And all the time I've been there, I've seen one who was maybe a mile away, but I've never actually sat and talked to them. But there are 2 people that really stand out that are just heroes in my book. Both of them in wheelchairs. One man was named Topher. He was from Colorado, and he was touring Bourgogne, and I was just amazed. He was such an absolute wonderful, shining star to be able to do that. Against all odds, he's out there and with his wheelchair, and he had a friend, which was nice to help him. That was great, and we're still in touch. And I met a woman who is in a wheelchair, and she was quite crippled. I don't remember what she had, but she would set up her tent. She would she had to lay on her belly and roll around to set up her tent. And we just got along fantastically. I met her in Chablis in the municipal campground. Spent a couple days there just to get to know her, and just impressive that they would be able to surmount all those difficulties and have pure joy. Really wonderful. Her Instagram is Rostel Pelgrim. I can't really spell it. Rosteolpelgrim, I think. It means wheelchair pilgrim.
I'll get it off you later and I'll add it to our show notes. That would be great. I'd love to see this. I love the idea of people, despite what other people would think would hold them back, going out on their adventures. And I realise, obviously the mobility issues that those people have are very different to your vision issues, Robert, but you've not let your vision hold you back. It's been your inspiration to continue, hasn't it, to do these things?
Yeah, I want to cram in as much vision as I can. That's kind of my goal. I want to pig out on vision.
So this is a hard question for you then. Maybe it's not. I'm perceiving things, so I won't say. Do you preference seeing landscapes or city scenes?
Ooh, not modern cities. Modern cities to me are pretty much all cookie cutter. They're all the same. I don't even go to major cities anymore. I've been to so many, they don't hold anything for me anymore. So I like smaller cities and the countryside, especially the wild country. I prefer getting farther away from civilization as I can. Civilization is eating up all the things we think are beautiful. And an illustration of that, I flew gliders and hang gliders for quite a while. And in Connecticut, I was flying in, 75, 74. And we'd be in a sailplane, we'd be flying all over, and it was all forest, all beautiful, pristine farms and forest. And that's what I was seeing all the time. And a buddy of mine has an airplane, we would fly over the same areas, and it's all developed. It's just all houses and strip malls. It's hard to see, very hard to see.
You're really drawn then towards that untouched, not necessarily purely untouched, but there's been limited development, let's say.
Yeah, and another illustration, I was in Africa in 77, hitchhiking around the Sahara, and it was just pure nothing, just sand dunes and Tuareg tribes, and I spent a whole winter there. It was stunning, and just 6 years ago, I went back to the same area to see how beautiful it was, and I'm driving around my driver, and I'm saying, well, when did they start growing crops here? And he goes, oh, that's not a crops. Those are garbage bags. They blew in hundreds of miles from the Atlantic, and it's just covered with trash. And we're talking 300 or 400-foot sand dunes that looks like they're growing cabbage. Yeah, that's why I kind of want to see as much of the beauty as I can, because I think the next generation won't have as much at all.
Another question then, and let's reflect more on beauty rather than the trash that us as humans are leaving with this world. Sunsets or sunrises?
Ooh, sunrise.
Yeah.
Sunrise.
And on your tours, do you make a point of trying to see those moments in the day, or take it as it comes?
On a trip, I'm usually up at about 5:30. Yeah, I watch the sun come up, have my coffee.
It's not to say you don't watch the sun go down.
I'm usually at that point of the day. I'm usually like, okay, find a spot. Other things are like set up camp, do this, do that, and find a place to set up. So yeah, I think sunrise is definitely my favorite.
Actually, and it's through riding my bikes, personally, where I really learned that old adage, red sky at night, sailors deny, red sky morning, shepherd's morning. It's true.
It is true.
Like,
it is true.
If there's a red sky in the morning,
Sooner
it's beautiful, but enjoy it because bad weather's coming through.
And speaking of that, the only weather I cannot tolerate anymore is ice cold rain and wind. And that's it. And I was a couple of years ago, I was in the Netherlands, and it was just pouring ice cold rain for 9 days. Everything was wet. And I finally looked at the weather report, and it was another 15 days of the same. I went, oh, okay. I closed up, and I got on a train and went south. Yeah. I can't do the cold rain anymore.
I feel like you've done it before.
Well, though. I can't do days.
You've ticked that off the list, you don't need to do it again, do you?
No, I just take a train to somewhere warmer. I'm not against that at all.
I'm fully on board with that. It's not to say that sometimes we shouldn't experience the discomfort, but we don't need to have it for 3 weeks in a row.
I've had it for years. You get to a certain point, it's like, okay, do I really want to be uncomfortable for that long?
So, Robert, on your trips, do you wild camp a lot, or are you in campsites, or?
Oh, as much as I can. As much as I can. In fact, my favorite places that I made the craziest decision. Where was I? I was in the Mekong, and I did about 70 miles that day, and I found a little nature preserve. And I said, oh, that looks like my kind of camping. So I got there at pitch dark about 10 o'clock at night, and I kind of snuck under the rope, and there was a little dirt path that I could follow, and I came across kind of like a pavilion, observation pavilion, but it was on the surface of the ground. I said, oh, there's a good spot. Put my tent up, got in, slept, and I heard lions roaring all night. I mean, huge, and they were very loud. And I realized, what the heck are lions doing here? And I got up in the morning, and they were not lions. They were like 14-foot crocodiles about 6 feet away from me.
Oh,
and luckily I was this far off, a foot and a half off the ground, 2 feet off the ground. Yeah, that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, again, just a slightly different type of danger to a pack of dogs.
Yeah.
Oh, far out. But do you have your own sort of camping ritual or routine then? So that, and what I mean by that is, certainly for myself, I love camping and going on a bike tour, and, it sort of makes me feel more connected with the landscape that I'm touring through, but also makes me realize just how little I actually need to be satisfied. Now, personally, something that I need though on these, I'm a coffee fiend, so I get excited by that first, brew of coffee in the morning, especially in the camp. Are you similar, Robert, or what sort of rituals might you have?
I cannot get up until I have my coffee.
Ah, very good.
Cannot even move.
We can keep talking to each other then.
I'm a bad boy. I take instant coffee.
Oh, that doesn't matter.
It's easier.
I call that a coffee-flavored beverage. In fact, in Vietnam, you would have had some fantastic coffee, no doubt.
Absolutely. In fact, I befriended a young man who has a coffee importing or exporting business, and he sent me a huge case of wonderful Vietnamese coffee. And I brought home 20 pounds of coffee stuffed in my bike bag or bike box from Colombia. Ooh, that was good coffee.
That's a reason to go back there when the political climate is more willing.
Oh, I think it's there now.
On that note then, Robert, what sort of plans do you have for your next immediate tour? Have you started putting your mind to that at the moment, of when that might be and where you might go?
Oh, absolutely. I've got 2 places first of all, I'm going to go visit places I lived and hung out with back in 1968 of all times. I'm going to go back for a month to England and then ride down to Siena, where I spent 4 or 5 months doing archaeological illustration. That was a lot of fun. So that's in Siena. That'll be a long trip.
That will be a phenomenal trip. Will you by any chance be coming through France on that trip?
I think I'm going to be skirting it. I'm not going to be by the Pyrenees. I'm going to be more towards Strasbourg and all that area, and then straight down to Genoa.
Maybe our paths should cross somewhere there. That would be.
Oh, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I was just thinking there, going back to places that you'd first been to. Is this an opportunity, Robert, to look through those old touring journal sketchbooks of yours? And maybe revisit areas and see where that inspiration came from?
Well, it's funny. I don't have my books anymore. I gave all of them to my best friend for his birthday.
There's no way to borrow them and look at them before you set off? That would be...
Yeah, I could do that, but I probably won't, because I like to have everything new all the time. I really don't like going back too much, because I've already been there.
Yeah, it's a fresh experience.
Oh, yeah. And I have the pictures in my head anyway, so.
Certainly. So I realise, Robert, and sadly, that sketching and painting now isn't part of your daily life. But you are active in terms of, your creative side through your photography. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I shoot quite a bit now.
Oh, wow. And I imagine that forms part of your tours as well.
Oh, of course. Kind of think it's like a photographic exploration on a bike. Not a tour with the camera, but a camera with a tour.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's my constant companion.
Oh, it resonates with me so much, Robert. I often say I don't know whether I'm a bike rider who likes taking photos or a photographer who likes going on a bike ride. I think it's a symbiotic relationship, but I can't tell you the number of rides I've taken to certain places with the anticipation of what I'm looking to see there. And I mean, here in the Pyrenees, I'm spoilt for choice. It's not just the mountains and the landscape, but the amazing birds of prey that we have thermaling overhead all the time, and it's a real delight. And I can imagine on your tours, that photographer in me, it resonates so much.
Right. You're never bored.
No.
You're always looking at. Well, I'm always looking at composition of what I'm looking at, color and composition. And so it's funny, the art part of my brain is transferring into the photography part of my brain. So I'm trying to use the same language and the same intent and the same exploration ideas. And it's working. Yeah.
Robert, I'm excited by that. I'm excited that, there's sadness in why you've had to make this transition, but I'm excited that you're not reflecting back, but you're looking forward. And you've developed a new way of engaging that creative side. Now, how can our listeners follow along or find out more about you and follow along with your journey? Are you active on any form of social media at all that we can track?
The only thing I do is Instagram. I actually got rid of websites, my gallery website. Yeah, I have almost no art presence anymore. I said, oh, that's old. Let whoever wants to see it go after it. So I'm on Instagram. I don't even know the address. Robert Reynolds 1.
I will definitely link to it in the show notes. And I look forward to seeing many of your photos from your tours filling that Instagram timeline. And just seeing it from that creative eye.
Well, I mix it up. Yeah, it's not just touring. It's random stuff from life and touring pictures.
It's a window into the life of Robert Reynolds.
Exactly.
Robert, I could talk to you for ages, and maybe I'll have to see whether we can get you on for a future podcast once you've done your next trip and talk about this London to Siena revisit. I would really, really welcome an opportunity to.
I would love that.
But I do have two very quick questions to finish off with. They're both cycling related. The first one, and I actually feel I know the answers to both of these, but I'm asking them anyway. So, Robert, if you had the choice of having to ride constantly up a hill or into a constant headwind, which one will you choose?
Uphill.
Uphill.
Headwinds, they're torture.
Yeah.
They're absolute torture. They break your spirit quicker than anything. I'd rather go up a mountain because you can always get off and push it. You can't do that in headwind. And I had a horrible headwind in France. It was like 5 days of 50 kilometers. Yeah, 40 or 50 kilometer headwinds. Broke me. I just got sick of it.
Was it the Mistral but was it around the Camargue? Was it the Mistral?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
The Mistral wind. I had that last year. It was horrendous.
Yeah, where was I? Canal du Midi.
Every single ride I've ever undertaken since that day riding towards Avignon in the most brutal of winds. Every windy day on a bike has now been compared to, well, it's windy, but it's not as windy as damn Avignon.
That will break your spirit quicker than anything. Yeah, and I love going up mountains. I just go slow.
Yeah, but the views and the sense of satisfaction. Oh, I love it. Okay, and last question, and I'm sure I know the answer to this, but I will ask it anyway. If you have a choice of spending 4 hours riding on your own or 4 hours riding with someone else, which one are you going to choose?
Well, it depends on the someone else, of course. I'd say 2 hours of each version.
Oh, what a fence sitter you are.
Yeah.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
I like them both, and I really can't make up mine because there's some people I would adore riding with, like the woman in the wheelchair. I would love to ride with her again. I would absolutely adore that. But then again, I like riding alone because you get to have your own thoughts. And so, yeah, I would say it's 2 hours of each.
It's interesting, actually, and I will say this because I thought about this a lot every time I've asked the question and heard the responses. What's really clear is it's a different experience riding your bike on your own as to with someone else. And I think it's that there's a level of immersion that perhaps we lose when we ride with others. That, you know, we're totally immersed in our own thoughts now and in the landscape around us on our own. But with others, we're probably more present and focused in their company. Maybe that's the thing. It's a hypothesis.
And slightly distracted because you're conversing about stupid stuff half the time. You know, yeah, it's 2 hours of each.
Okay. I'll allow it.
Yeah,
well,
thank you.
Robert, it has been an absolute pleasure to spend time with you and to hear more about your incredible story. I feel inspired about what you've done in your past, but what you're looking and doing now and achieving for your future as well. And I'm certainly looking forward to keeping in touch and following along with your future touring adventures.
Perfect. Thank you. Nice to be here too.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I really hope you've enjoyed listening to this latest episode of the Seek Travel Ride podcast just as much as I enjoyed conducting the interview. If I could ask if you could just take the time quickly now to go into that podcast player app of yours and give us a rating and a review, I'd really appreciate it because it does help the show to grow and reach a wider audience. Or alternatively, just talk about the show with your friends and family and share it on your social media. Lastly, have you got your own story that you'd like us to share here on the show? Then why not get in touch by sending me an email at podcast@seektravelride.com and talk to me about being featured as a guest for the show. Until next time, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.